Sometimes we have to make something first to figure out how to make it. And it may be that you discover a lot in the process of making. And so the second or the third time you try and do it is when you'll really be able to show off your skill with using material and to show off your intention with the design of the piece. So first I want to start by showing how to make slabs. One way to make them is to cut a very even slice off of your loaf of clay. In my experience, cutting like this won't make it perfect, but it's a really good start. So I'm going to take this slice of clay and put it down on my board and make it more even. I might start just by pushing down with the heel of my hand. Clay shrinks as it dries, and it shrinks again in the firing. And it causes stress on the clay. And where the clay maybe has variations from thick areas to thin areas, it's going to dry out faster and it's going to heat up quicker in the kiln, and it might be shrinking at different rates in different parts of your piece, which can cause cracks. So we want the slabs to be as close to the same thickness throughout your entire piece as possible. I like to use a rolling pin on the clay, but I realize that you might not all have rolling pins. So there's several things I found in my house that are good substitutes for rolling pins. One is this bottle, and it just has a nice flat area on it, and it has a good hefty weight to it, and I can use this to even it out. After I do a couple of rolls on it, I'm going to flip the slab upside down. What happens when you roll it is you tend to just stretch out the upper face. By flipping it and rolling it on the back side also, you're making an even compression and an even alignment of the clay particles throughout the entire slab. I'm also going to rotate my slab. So here I'm going to flip it and rotate it 90 degrees, and I'm going to roll it in this direction now so that all the clay particles are evenly spread apart. There's also a technique where you can fling it on the board. I'm going to try and catch it at an angle and fling it back towards me, and it's going to stretch it out. And now I'm going to flip it and turn it 90 degrees and do it again. You might notice that the clay sticks to your board if the spot on your board or your piece of cardboard where you're working starts to get wet. The clay will stick to a wet spot. So I'm going to try and move over to a dry spot here. Again, I'm going to fling it towards me. Each time I fling it, I'm kind of catching the back part of it on the board, and it's stretching it out. But if I notice that I'm starting to get a tear in it, or if one spot is starting to get thin, I'm going to stop. I'm going to trim off some of these thin edges because I just know that I'm not going to use that part. If I trim it off now, I can save these scraps of clay and recycle them and use them later. It's really important that you compress both sides of the slabs that you're going to use for this project. I'm going to use the plastic rib that I've made from the feta cheese container. You could also use a rubber spatula, or you could make one of these out of an old library card, an old laminated ID card. I'm going to take this tool and, holding it with my fingers pretty close to the top edge, swipe it across the surface of the slab. You need to flip it and do the back side of your slabs also. I'm going to come across with my compression tool from multiple different angles. So these are some vertical swipes, then I'm going to do some horizontal swipes. I might even rotate the whole slab 180 degrees and come at it from all different directions. I'm going to keep flipping the slab and do this multiple times. It's easier to see the actual thickness of your slab if you cut the side edge. This is a good medium thickness to shoot for. I like to think about this as being as thick as your pinky finger. I'm really lucky to have this wonderful lace doily at home, and I am going to put it on the clay slab and roll my water bottle over it to get this impression. Any kind of textured fabric is usually great for making impressions. I'm thinking of coarse burlap or maybe a corduroy type fabric. This will look really great with a glaze over it that might sink down into the texture areas and become a different color. Here's another material I found at home that I thought would be cool. It's a plastic netting from a bag of produce that we got. And I'm going to put this down on the clay slab and roll across it with my water bottle. Oh, that looks nice. I found this section of a pull chain. I'm gonna lay this across the slab and go over that with my rolling pin. Ooh, vivid. I also found this cheap old bracelet that I thought had a cool texture pattern on it. I know you guys have been doing a lot of texture work on your pieces already. We're gonna do even more with this project, especially because working with flat slabs is just such a great opportunity to impress textures in the clay. That would make a really great detail maybe around the rim of a plate. You can use different toys you might have around the house to get textures. Old jewelry is usually really interesting. Buttons, earrings. Another interesting texture I bet you all have at home is the bottom of the shoe. I'm applying pretty firm pressure here. Nice. Yeah, this is the kind of work you can do with a slab while it's flat on the table that I wouldn't be able to get on my piece once I had shaped the slab. So for the next part of this, I'm going to drape the slabs over different shaped objects that I found around my home. You can use almost anything. I have a glass bowl and pie dish, a cardboard box, and I have some fruit and vegetable here also. You just have to line whatever you're using with thin plastic wrap first so that you can lift the clay slab off. Clay will stick to any of these objects if I didn't do that, and I wouldn't be able to get my slab off of the object. So I have this really thin plastic from a produce bag. You could just try and recreate the object that you're molding your clay slabs over and try and keep it the same shape but get different textures on it with your clay slabs. Or you could create something completely new and invent a form that hasn't occurred yet. I could take parts of this squash and combine it with maybe capturing part of this corner of the cardboard box to extend parts of it up and have geometric elements coming out of this organic bottom. With this bowl, I'm going to change the shape of it by putting clay slabs just on the sides, and I'm going to pull those out in sections and put them together to make more of an oval shaped tray. The clay is really soft right now. I just rolled it out, so I'm going to lay it and gently press it into the shape of the bowl. After these have stiffened up a little bit, I'll be able to take them out of the glass bowl and they'll retain their curved shape. I'll cut them to fit together better, and then I'll join them together using that slip and score technique. Get inventive with the different objects that you're gathering from around your household. Look for interesting curves and corners and shapes that you can capture with a slab of clay. It's great if you have a firm idea and want to map out a plan ahead of time for what you want to make, but it's also perfectly all right to figure it out along the way and just capture a bunch of different shapes and then play around with how you're going to cut them apart and piece them back together later in the process. With this piece, I have these 5 sections. It was just a straight bend in it, and then I cut that bend to get this flared out cone. So each one of these sections, instead of keeping it rectangular, I cut it into almost a trapezoid shape. And I really like how that dramatic shoe tread texture with the waves up and down kind of echo the waves in and out. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time slipping and scoring each one of these 5 joints going around. And then I'm going to go on the inside and reinforce them all with a coil also. Okay, I have a bunch of different shaped slabs here, all with textures on them. They have been sitting out for about 4 hours, and I'm afraid it's been a little too long. I can bend this slab pretty far without it breaking. If I start to bend it too much though, here it is breaking. So I can kind of give it a light coating with water to help it be not too stiff for when I'm going to join 2 halves of this squash together. And you can see, because the edge of my slab was uneven, that that seam isn't close enough yet to fit. So I'm going to trim these back so that they fit. When you're trimming your edges, do just a little bit at a time. You can always cut more off. But if you cut off too much, it's really hard to add more clay back on. So I think I've got this trimmed pretty well to fit together. I'm going to lay one side down, and I'm going to slip and score the edge all the way around on both sides. So I'm going around the edge with wet fingertips, and then I'm going to take my fork and cut in pretty deep. And then I'm going to go back with water and get water to sink down into those deep cut marks that I made with the fork. It's important when you slip and score that you go back and forth over it. And so I am going in with this fork at least a half a dozen times, back and forth. Each time I'm going to slather water on there and make sure that the water goes down into the grooves that I'm making with the fork. If you're really sensitive to how it feels when you dig your fork into it, how the material responds to the pressure, you can feel when it's ready. It just feels softer. When I put these 2 edges together, they're going to just cling onto each other. Nice. So I'm using a little bit of back and forth pressure. I call it a shimmy, where I'm taking the 2 sets of teeth, or the 2 halves of a zipper that I've made, and I'm moving them back and forth and hooking them into each other. It's really important that you compress the seams that you make. So I took the 2 scored edges and I joined them together like 2 halves of a zipper, but inside the seam, the clay is really mushy. There's little teeny micro air bubbles in there, and it certainly doesn't have the same level of compaction to the material in there that the rest of the slab area on this piece does. And that difference will definitely lead to a crack along the seam if I don't compress that area. So I'm going to go on the inside with a coil of clay. I have to blend it in to the surrounding clay area. And in doing so, I am applying pressure. I'm pressing against my outside hand, compressing the clay in that area, making it tight and firm and dense. I have to put a bottom on this piece, which should be easy. I have another slab section. I'm just going to set this on here, and I can trace around. And now I'm cutting out the exact shape that I need from this other slab section. And then I need to slip and score this area and this area and join that on here. Again, go deep with the fork. Use a lot of water, and the more stiff your slabs are, the more thoroughly you need to do this. Go in multiple directions. Now I'm going to slip and score this edge to match. What I'm going to do here is give it a series of kind of firm taps on the table. And that's going to help give it some compression. I can also just go with the heel of my hand like this. And I'm trying to really firm up the clay in that joint area. I had an idea to make a pouring vessel with this piece, and I have another little shaped slab that I want to make a spout out of. So I'm going to spend some time cutting this to a more pleasing shape. It's too square with these corners on it right now. I want to make it have some of the curves in it that the rest of the squash vessel does. So I'll spend some more time working on this. When I do attach it, I'm going to trace on the inside here where I want that to sit. And then I'm going to cut this shape out like so. So when I put the spout on, it'll give me a pouring channel from the vessel into the spout. On my handle, I've intentionally left the two ends wider than the center part. I want the attachment points to be the widest points of this handle. I certainly wouldn't want it to get more narrow where it attached on. I think that's pretty good. I like how that complements the shape of the spout. It's kind of a nice balance that's going on here. I'm going to do some work in making it all fit. And I'm going to slip and score the handle also. I like how that handle kind of continues the angle of the spout and it comes down into this top part of the handle, but I could certainly change that shape. I could have it come up in the air a little bit more like that. Nice. Okay, so not only is it going to be wider where it attaches, I'm also going to make it thicker where it attaches. I'm going to go underneath right here. I call this the armpit of the piece, and I'm going to go right in there also with coils of extra soft clay, and I'm going to thicken the attachment like so. This is just like the kind of coil that I would put in between any two slab seams joining together. It's reinforcing and it's allowing me the opportunity to get in there and compress this slip and score joint. You want the part of the clay that attaches onto the rest of the piece, this juncture right here, to be the thickest element in the handle. And I'm also going to do that on the bottom in here. I'm going to use a pencil to do my blending down in there. You want to give the end user of this piece a sense of confidence that they can pick it up by the handle. When it's filled with liquid, it's going to be heavier. And you want them to feel comfortably confident that they can pick it up by the handle and the handle's going to do its job and the piece is going to hold together and there's no question about it. And having it be thicker down here and up here at these attachment points will go a long way towards giving them that kind of visual okay that the piece is going to hold together. And where I have inadvertently erased some of my lace texture, I'm going to do a little fake drawing it back in. It's not going to be the actual pattern, but I'm going to do some kind of shorthand mark making that's going to make it seem like it has that pattern all over it. So I'm just going around with a pencil and kind of drawing some marks back in to try to emulate what's happening underneath. And then I'm going to go and soften those marks with a wet fingertip, and hopefully no one will notice that the texture got a little erased right there. So I'm going to spend just a little bit more time cleaning this up and going around all the edges. That's the thing with using slabs, is you have a lot of edges in your pieces now all of a sudden. And you know when you cut that edge, it can look really raw and sharp, and sometimes it really exposes the grit of the clay, and it doesn't have that kind of smooth, compressed, intentional, finished look to it. So every edge that I've made, I'm going to go around repeatedly with wet fingertips and smooth it out. I can still keep this sharp and square if I want to. I don't have to make it completely rounded edge. I mean, that's my choice, but I'm going to still go and compress the edge. Compressing the edge all the way around can also help prevent cracks from forming. I want this clay to look and feel intentionally finished. I want there to be a sense that this rim is the shape and the overall piece is the size that I want it to be. And I want to convey that sense by having it finished on the edge, not just like that's where I happened to stop working or that's where I ran out of clay. I want it to look like it's supposed to be finished there and that there's a sense of completeness to it. Okay, these are the two sections that I put that net texture on that I stiffened up inside this glass bowl. And I decided to just do two sides of it. These have some nice firmness to them now. So I'm going to cut through both slabs at the same time. Oh. And then they should match up. I am slip and scoring the edges where the two slabs are going to join together. I am doing this because the slab has a little bit of stiffness to it. And once it does, the clay won't stick to itself. You need to open it up and make it soft and receptive, and then it'll stay together. So now that these two edges are slipped and scored very thoroughly, I'm going to join them together. And I'm going to apply a slight up and down, kind of a shimmy back and forth pressure as I really press the two sides into each other. Make it tight. I feel like it's getting a little dry on the top over here, so I'm going to run wet fingertips around it, kind of give it a slather of water on the outside. Don't let it get too dry while you're working on it. Slabs can dry out really quickly. They're very exposed to the air, and they can go from being too soft to too hard really quickly. So you need to stay on top of how dry they're getting. Also, I need to go around with an extra coil of clay over the joint and work it in. Using pressure, working against my other hand on the opposite side of the clay wall. It's not just blending it in a cosmetic way. It's actually applying a compressive touch to it so that this joint becomes just as dense and firm as the surrounding slab wall. So this slab is pretty soft. I haven't really let it stiffen up at all from when I made it. It's not really cheese hard yet, but I'm just going to use kind of a small section of it, and I'm actually really grateful this one is more soft. So I'm going to start to cut this to fit. Just cutting a little bit at a time because I can always trim more off. And I'm going to cut this in a curve, maybe to help echo the curved line of the pattern that's in the texture. I really like how this part of the bowl is flaring out, but this part is going in. How that influences our sense of volume with the piece, and maybe it seems like this is displacing air. It makes it seem even more puffy, that it's unlike the shapes on the rest of the bowl. And I'm giving it a convex curve, both in this direction and in this direction. So feel free to play around with this project. You are creating something that has never existed before. You're inventing new textures and you're combining shapes in unique ways. You might be inspired by what you molded your slabs over, but what you make from those original mold forms is going to change. It's going to be a unique object.